So, welcome back. I am your host, Ian Prize, and this is Sort of Young Person's Guide to Prog Rock. And I'm welcoming back Ed.
Hey.
Rufus.
Hello.
B. Ryan.
Hello.
R. Ryan. And Nick.
Thanks for having me. Love the podcast.
I hope so. You're back. So last week we did part 1 of Dark Side of the Moon, and this week we are back with side 2.
The backside of the moon.
Okay. The backside of the moon. So we left last week on Great Gig in the Sky, and we are back with Money. So Money was the hit off of this album, and what a hit it was. I have no idea how high it went up in the charts, but it is the hit single off of this album. But interestingly, it is 6 minutes long, and it is in 7/8. And that just means that instead of the normal 4/4, so it has that interesting bump, ba-ba-dum, bump, 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 riff.
What a bass line.
Which is missing a beat. And it gives it kind of a lurching, funky feel. So I feel like I've heard the song too many times, and then it starts, and I'm like, oh yeah, I love this song. It's kind of like my experience with Roundabout, where it's like I feel like I've heard it on classic rock radio way too many times, and then when we're actually there, I'm like, yeah, no, I love this. So, talk to me about Money.
That's a good way to put it. The song's got a great hook with the cash register and everything. I'm sure like even someone who would not like Pink Floyd would be like, that's clever.
Yeah.
However, this was released as a single, and as a single on the Billboard charts, how high did it get?
I mean, it looks like pretty high. So top 40, so we've got 10, 18, 6, 13. So it actually charted as a single.
I think it is notable. This is going to be a real push my glasses up my nose moment, but I think it is the only top 40 hit in 7/4.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's almost for sure true. Again, helloprogfrog@gmail.com if you have any other facts and factotums about this. But no, for sure, this is a rarity in the fact that it's in an unusual time signature. And it grooves so well, you don't think about it being in an unusual time signature, but boy, oh boy, does it groove.
Yeah, and I think to your point, that's why even when you hear it for the umpteenth time on KZOK, it's like, oh yeah, I could still get down to this.
Yeah.
Straight away, the first thing you mentioned there, that missing beats, it is that makes the bass line so infectious, because it's like because it doesn't quite resolve. It starts again and it starts again, and it's just, you just always want to hear that next note.
But the next note is the beginning of the next riff.
Yeah, it's so cool. I think the way the lines finish and start in the next line as well is also in that same vein of dragging you to the next bit of the song.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. Like there's that bit of the line that just finishes in the next line continually through it. The guitar again, it's that really choppy tremolo sound, that go. I love that.
Yeah.
For a guitarist, there's like some just awesome sounds in this song.
I mean, I think this is a guitar tour de force for sure.
Yeah. Like for example, the solo in it, it sounds like something the Allman Brothers would do. It doesn't sound like a Pink Floyd solo bit. It sounds like an Allman Brothers thing. It's kind of jolly. It's upbeat. It's using these major tonalities that you don't really associate with them, and I like it for that. You've just heard Great Gig in the Sky. There's like a little interlude with the roadie talking about punching someone or something, and then that, and it's just like, it's such a shift. It really just takes you somewhere else.
Yeah, light and shade.
It's what makes this album so interesting. It's just like, it's so much ear candy. Just there's just so much going on, isn't there? Brilliant.
I think the main takeaway I have from this song is it almost makes the word money onomatopoeic. You know, you can
feel the money in the money.
The money, right? You know, to an extent that's helped by the whole like money foley that they've got going through it and stuff.
Yeah, talk to us about the money foley.
Oh right, yeah. Well,
so the song starts with the sound effects. The law
from
of
that
money.
is them throwing around change around the clay studio of Roger Waters' wife, apparently. Yeah. Which is just a tidbit of information, I suppose.
I have seen people cutting film tape and sticking that together. And it's something that takes ages. So I'm assuming you'd have to do it the same way.
I think that is. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what they did. Is they physically cut it like 7 parts, 7 sound effects spliced together.
The way that's executed, like, it's crisply tight. You know, they haven't just used one or two obvious sounds. There's actually about 4 or 5.
No, they think they do all 7. So you have 7
different,
like, or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, obviously, it tells you what the song's about. Great info. But no, I think the way in which the song is produced and the way in which they approach it rhythmically lends itself to this feeling of a cash drawer being opened and shut constantly, right? The stutter step of the 7/8, the tremolo of the guitar, and even down to the drumming, it all
you feel rich,
feels lurched, and it feels staccato-y, I guess, is a way of describing it.
This, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, is really Roger Waters' breakout for his kind of signature songwriting and sound that I think becomes very typical of him later in the career, and if not, entire albums are basically this kind of vibe. But I think this is a good example where it works, because my theory is Roger Waters' lyrics work great when he's not singing. David's singing.
Yeah.
I think it works a lot better.
Interesting.
I also think this is the last point in Pink Floyd's history where they can write this song.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, they've done metal, and I think they are successful, comfortable musicians. They're definitely not the Beatles. They're not A tier, but this is what pushes them in the stratosphere. I don't know if they have that moral high ground to write a song Money. After this, they're taking the Rolls Royces to the studios. They all have country homes. So this is that fine little window.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like they're not talking about just money, is it? It's about greed. But yeah, you're right. You can never make that point if you've got the dollar. People can't separate those two things, can they?
That's true. Yeah.
But obviously the riff makes it a sticky song. But then we come to a 2-part solo. So the first part is the riff plus some saxophone. So we are introduced to Dick Perry, a friend of theirs from Cambridge who played some saxophone, and again, one of these guest musicians that just makes this album.
Because I have to say, I already am a fan of the saxophone quite a bit, but again, to what we're talking about as far as bringing in outsiders, boy, does it add something.
Yeah.
My good, there's some of my favorite parts on the whole album.
Yeah.
So, listening to this album for the first time, I never questioned, it's like, why is there a saxophone here? Isn't this a rock album? And I think that's a testament to the band and to Dick Perry.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I've ever heard a saxophone solo over a rock song and been like, yep, thumbs up, like, this is normal.
Okay. Yeah.
But it was so effortless. It felt so right that whoever's call it was to add a saxophone to this song was just like, hey, give yourself like 100,000 pats on the back, because that's a brave choice to make.
And a successful choice. Yeah.
And they nailed it.
You're 100% right. I have never thought about how weird the saxophone is on this, because I think you're right. There could have been a danger of it being like the 80s sexy sax, which really does stand out painfully. But this integrated right in.
And I think what's awesome about the saxophone solo is that it's so different from a guitar solo.
Yeah.
Like, sure, they're playing like the same notes, but the way that you do like the little trills and stuff, like what's impressive on a saxophone for a saxophone player sounds way different than what sounds impressive on a guitar for a guitar player. Because this easily could have just been another guitar solo, but it's not. And I think that's why Money from beginning to end is so good.
Yeah. It keeps it interesting.
Right. It keeps it interesting, and it adds a new fun element to what's already like a great ensemble that they've already assembled. So I would love to know when the decision was made to add the saxophone, but what a choice.
Yeah. Strong, beautiful choice. Mm-hmm. So the breakdown in Money happened because they were just like, well, we should just go into 4/4. So it's been 7/8 this whole time. Let's just go into 4/4 for a sweet little breakdown. So it's this little serendipitous moment.
The breakdown is what makes the song for me. It comes in right when it needs it. It's the perfect bridge, if you will, for like the first like 2/3 of the 7/8 to get to the last third of the 7/8 like blues part, quote unquote. But going to 4/4 for David Gilmour's rockin' guitar, this is when the rock and roll of Pink Floyd really comes out.
Well, I was about to say that. I was going to say they're hearkening back to what they originally loved so much, and it's one of those moments where like they allow themselves to have a little bit of fun again.
Just let their hair down just a little bit, and Dave makes great use of that. He goes absolutely nuts.
Yes, oh yes, he does.
From like being a bassist, occasional bassist myself, I just love playing this part. Like the whole walk down as Nick Mason is just like going to town on those drums. It's just such a fun part. And I don't know if Pink Floyd ever attempts anything like this again. I know they do it in Shine On You Crazy Diamond. They change.
Yeah.
And in Dogs, I know they go from 4/4 to 3/4.
I mean, I think also this is a real succinct song. This is 7 minutes, not 15 or whatever, 18 minutes?
Yeah.
17 minutes?
It's funny that you say that. You can only say a 7-minute song is succinct if you're on a
podcast. Yeah. Yeah. A succinct hot single in a easy breezy 7 minutes with a 3-minute solo.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm going to be a little brave here and try to talk about the composition of music, which is not my strong suit.
We're here to support you, Brian.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but having a heavy sax, which I go to very jazzy, but then going to more of the blues rock, it is a very ambitious combination of the two styles. And we've talked about in this podcast before about prog rock being that transition to more jazz-based rock. It's done really well because as if you've listened to our episodes on like King Crimson, when things get too jazzy, I tune out. But this saxophone kicks. But I think in general, if you said there's a saxophone in this prog rock song, I'm going to be real nervous. But obviously this is one of the all-time greats.
I think it's because of the blues element that it works.
Yeah.
It's like the saxophone has that because you can bend notes up and, you know, that's something that works well with the more blues guitar thing. And, you know, blues is synonymous with saxophone. You know, it was a big element of big band stuff in the 60s. So, yeah, it brings those two worlds together in a nice way, and that's probably why it works so well. And when you look at the pedigree of the stuff they were listening to and into as they were learning, they were really into the blues. And you can see there's a great love for that, and it comes up again in this album. I think having that is what makes them a little bit different to other prog bands. You know, a lot of other prog bands really distance themselves from rhythm and blues.
I mean, I think this is, to both your points, I think this is why this album retained its commercial and critical appeal, or I guess popular appeal, because I think they're using things that we've heard before. So they use the blues standard kind of 12-bar blues effect, and they make it a little bit more interesting. They're progging up normal songs. You know, I think in this same period, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and King Crimson are going off a deep end of classicalism and jazz, whereas I think Pink Floyd are retaining that blues pedigree, but just making it a little bit more interesting.
You know, and one of the interesting things about blues is that, you know, if you say you're first learning to play guitar, you might learn a 12-bar blues and it sounds like a really simple thing. You'll go off and learn loads of complicated things, and then you may come back to the blues later on and you realise that it enables you to do really interesting things musically. Like you can layer a major and a minor on top of each other, which you can't do in other
styles.
You can't do in classical music, and it actually opens up things that you never would have thought of. You can break typical rules, and it's like it actually is. Surely that is as back progressive as you can be. You know, it allows you to put folks on the road where you least expect them. You know. And I always think it surprises me that it doesn't get used more. Yeah. But there we go.
There we are.
Do you think they noticed, because in 1973, do you think they realized that prog rock was a movement and they were sort of joining powers with the bands that were in the same sort of sphere? Or were they just doing things their way and they just happened to align with a bunch of these other musicians?
So the interesting thing about prog rock, and I guess I realize this in a more general sense, your actual experience as a musician is you're in a studio, then you're on tour, then you're in a stadium, then you're back on tour, then you're back in a studio. And I don't think at any point, like, you probably miss pop culture in a more general sense. You know, especially in the 70s. Obviously, you might have heard stuff on the radio and, you know, maybe ELP listened to Jethro Tull's last song or whatever it was. But it was like for all of these bands, you know, was Pink Floyd listening to the last Yes release? You know, this is before
That's a good point.
You know, before streaming. This is before you just had it on the tape deck in the tour bus. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of it. And obviously they did know each other. In all my years of prog rock love, I've never heard Yes talk about Pink Floyd or Pink Floyd talk about Jethro Tull or whatever. Like, I'm not sure how much they are an integrated genre. And obviously, rewinding all the way to 1968, they are all just a bunch of Beatles-inspired kids. And I'm sure in the London club scene, they probably met each other, maybe played on sets together, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And definitely I know that they are aware of each other. Yeah, I just don't think there's ever a council assembled where they just say, we're all prog rock.
Yeah, without going too out of the song Money, but on this topic, yeah, I guess artists rarely compare themselves to the contemporaries, and I was very deliberate about using the word artist because I don't know how entertainers compare each other. But as an artist, you want to see yourself as an individual and separate.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah. So, this song ends with the voices. So Dark Side of the Moon, as I'm sure you have all remembered, has these interviews that are interspersed throughout the songs. And again, we've been saying this about pretty much every element of Dark Side of the Moon. This is what makes the album. So Roger Waters wanted to ask people a bunch of random interview questions, record their answers, and just chuck them into the songs. So he interviewed people in Abbey Road. He interviewed Paul and Linda McCartney, the Wings, who were recording in the studio next to them, but he said that they were basically too used to being interviewed, so they didn't give interesting interviews. But you get all of the stuff. So Jerry O'Driscoll, the There Is No Dark Side of the Moon, really. In fact, it's all dark guy. You know, you get I Punched Him in the Face. Like, you get all of these, like, weird little snippets, and it's like hearing voices in a good way. I mean, they're the thing that make Dark Side Dark Side.
Yeah.
It's such a fun idea, but it's one of those things you could only ever do once, and you could never copy this idea either. But, well, you already said it, Ian. It's what makes it, and it brings out a lot of those themes. And I don't know if those like tapes exist somewhere, but I'd kill to actually hear exactly what was said in terms of back and forth. If they're buried somewhere in Abbey Road or Alan Parsons' flat or, you know, garage somewhere.
It's the one where he's talking to the roadie, like, you know, he's talking about getting in a fight or something on a drunken night out. It's just, I'd love to hear that story.
Because all of the voices that get inserted in Dark Side, it also feels very conversational. Like these are just normal people talking about pretty mundane stuff.
Yeah, you feel like they're just hanging out while Dark Side's being recorded.
Which, to be a fly on the wall during those parts. I mean, again, I'm sure there were 18-hour days. And
watching Alan move the EQ up and down like, one by one.
Again, Pink Floyd doing something so well that you don't question it, and it just fits.
There's definitely not actually a theme to them, but they feel like there's a thematic quality. Like they are just random phrases, but there feels like there's something deeper there, but there isn't. And this is the craziness of Dark Side of the Moon.
I think the power of suggestion comes in again here because you're already, though, in this mood from the lyrics.
Yeah.
Which those are pretty purposeful in terms of the themes they try and touch on at various points. And I think you're already kind of in that headspace. And that's why these little snippets take on more meaning than they probably had when in reality they're just asking questions like, when was the last time you got totally wasted and what happened? Because they really did ask questions like that.
Yeah, no, and I guess the fact that people are also responding to the same question, that you get a thematicness within the responses. Interesting. And then, you know, again, and then I think the very last bit where There Is No Dark Side of the Moon really feels so deep. And as you can hear him, you can see millions of college freshmen hanging up the poster.
Wouldn't it be depressing if this all was just like a marketing thing to sell the poster?
Yeah. It's just like, oh crap, we've got this really amazing poster. We need to come up with an album. Pronto, guys.
Inspiring.
Oh boy. So we transition smoothly and effortlessly into Us and Them. So Us and Them was a Rick Wright song that he had written for one of their previous attempts at a movie soundtrack. So they had done 2 movie soundtracks at this point, and the band didn't end up using it. And when they were coming up with new songs for what would become Dark Side of the Moon, Rick Wright dusted this off, this very beautiful chord progression. Roger Waters added these lyrics, and there you have it, Us and Them. So continuing on from Nick's theme about the second half of the album, which is the modern stresses of life, Us and Them is obviously probably one of the best distillations of the concept of us and them. So it's about war, it's about prejudice, it's about turning a blind eye, it's about all of that stuff, and it's probably some of Roger Waters' best lyrics, and certainly some of Rick Wright's best piano work and compositional work.
Yeah, this is my favorite song on the album. I think this is as good as Roger ever gets. You don't really get to see Rick Wright really shine, which is sad, because he's so good here. It's so smooth, it's so nice, and I wish there was more of this, actually. It's kind of sad that this is sort of it for him in a lot of ways.
I think he'll do the beginning of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and then that's all we ever get of Rick Wright.
Yeah.
Again, for the rest of Pink Floyd, really. And, I think that was another thing that this album... Again, another thing that makes this album amazing. They use all of their band members perfectly. So obviously they've used the outside people perfectly. And actually, this is true for every band at the height of their power. So when you think of, like, Led Zeppelin, you actually think of all 4 being good at what they were doing. You think of Yes, circa Fragile, as being all really good at what they were doing. And then Dark Side of the Moon, you can hear Nick Mason's tasteful use of drums, but they're still fun. Obviously, Rogers' lyrics, David's guitar, and then Rick Wright's keyboard work. And they've used everyone perfectly.
100%. And while I think they do that to a fair extent on Wish You Were Here, maybe the spice is even a little bit better distributed here, I suppose.
I mean, I think Wish You Were Here, they parachute in Rick just enough. I feel like Rick's still part of the tapestry for this album.
The song itself, take the meaning of the song away, the dynamics are massive. This gentle sound and then the big lift. And it happens again in some of the other songs. I was like, what is it that generates that level of massiveness in the dynamics? And I noticed there's always the big piano chord that's got like it's like a grand piano sound that's got 10 fingers hitting the keyboard at once.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of Day in the Life. They've got this big section where the orchestra's coming all the way up and they get to the end, and when they were recording it, it was like a bit of a letdown because the last note was kind of fizzled out. So they just all recorded themselves hitting a piano each.
One big E chord.
Yeah. So it's got that though. I feel like that's what's creating that massive sound. It's just grand piano.
They've got that walk down, don't they? Like 2.5 minutes or whatever it is on the piano.
Oh, that section as well. That little section of the piano it's really graceful. It tinkles away and it's quite short. And like Brian says, it just leaves you kind of, I want more.
It's a smoky jazz room that slowly explodes into the sort of
swelling crescendo.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a song. For me, that's the best thing they do.
So this song, as with the rest of this album, has my favorite production trick, and this is the 1-1-1 mixing. I'm sure there's a technical name for it. At the beginning, he fades in on an organ right down the middle. And actually, it's funny, the organ fades to the side, and we come back to Alan Parsons' favorite trick, which is one thing on one side, one thing on another side, and some sort of paddy thing down the middle.
Right.
And he always keeps that going on throughout the whole album, but it gives it this clarity. And I think because I feel like they must have known that that's what was happening. Like, as in the band is clued into that's how he's recording it. I feel like both David and Rick play really cleanly on each ear, so you're never overloaded. This album is a really kind of spacey album, and this song's a very spacey song.
You feel like you're in a room with a musician there and a musician there. Spatially, you can see where people are stood And I think that's really important in music, because if you go to see a band, that's what it looks like. And that's where the sound comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the feeling I get from this, is you get a sense of physically being there. You get the sense of space. And, again, I think that's also true because they recorded this acoustic piano, so you feel like you're there watching him play piano.
You're in the room with them. I was going to say with 111, I think it works well with this music as well, because it's just this warm band, right, from left to right. It's not like
a bunch of shit going on all the time.
Yeah, and they haven't severely EQ'd it on the right or the left. Yep. How do I describe this? Basically, like, in modern day, if you're going to pan something to the right and the left, like Ed was describing, usually they'll cut away a lot of the lower end, because if someone is listening on a mono speaker, then that's all going to get squished to one speaker and it's going to sound rubbish, basically. So to avoid that, people who move an instrument to the far right, to the far left, they'll cut away this low end. But the problem with that is you don't get this warmth, right, that you get naturally from an instrument. Clearly they're not worried about this here. They didn't seem to worry that if you were listening to this on mono speaker, it would be too muddy. I don't even think they were really that worried about mud at the time, because when you think about the quality of the speakers around the time this came out, they weren't as high fidelity as they are now. Yeah. That's just the truth of technology. So I don't think they were as concerned. And, it just turns out that it worked out for them in the long run.
Yeah. And boy, did it work out.
As a personal anecdote, this used to be, this is not something I'm not too much into this anymore, but this used to be my own favorite thing whenever somebody had a new piece of hi-fi gear. This was the song.
Yeah.
This was always what I would throw on as my benchmark song. And I don't really know why. The dynamics are interesting.
Yeah.
Where we go from verse to chorus there, that's a pretty interesting shift. But for whatever reason, this just spoke to me. And
I think this was the first song of Pink Floyd's, besides Shine On You Crazy Diamond, but this is probably the first song that I knew was by Pink Floyd that I would have called my favorite. I've rotated through all of them as my favorite song by this point. But yeah, this was the first one. It's got everything.
Yeah, like you say, the lyrics probably, Roger Waters is some of his best. He's making his point about the creation of us and them and how that is the cause of all human confrontation. And he's made his point in the best way he ever possibly could. And ever will need to be honest. Yeah. He's done it beautifully.
For the subject matter of the song, and for it to be distilled down into like very simple words, the smoothness of the song juxtaposed with the sort of terrors of humanity is very interesting. It makes the full band parts with the swell during the chorus. Yeah. It makes the swell that much more meaningful. And us and them is like such a simple concept, but it's something that we as humans have been doing for like hundreds of thousands of years. Yep. And it's hard to imagine a truly collectivistic society where everybody's pulling for the same goal. And would that be an idealized humanity? I don't know.
That's beyond the scope of Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah.
I think, and that's kind of the point, is it's an eternal thing, and Rogers hit on it with an economy of phrasing. And they're deep without being kind of soppy.
Yeah, this song could have very easily become like a protest song almost. And in its core, I think it is, but it's not CCR, running through the jungle. It's like, this is about all wars, all
prejudices,
conflict,
and stuff.
Yeah. All prejudices.
Yeah.
He touches on something that's like a classic theme here. It's not in his typical overwrought fashion nowadays, and especially after this, he's so bombastic, and it just beats you over the head with whatever message he's trying to get across. But are they the best? Again, when you say that, I'm trying to think of a counterexample or think, oh no, I still like these ones better. But
I think he's clearly dealing with stuff.
Okay.
He's clearly dealing with stuff that's outside of being in a band. I think a lot of what everyone else is writing about is, it's their life, isn't it? It's like being on tour.
Wine, women, and song is the classic phrase.
Yeah, like I think he's just been through some stuff at this point. I think the stuff that happened with Sid, it always comes up.
Yeah.
He's obviously traumatized by that, and I think that's just opened him up to like worrying about otherworldly matters, and he's always thinking of stuff outside of him and the band. And I think it's just, for a young man as well, it's not the norm, is it? And I think that's why he stands out as a little bit different, and his songs become different for that reason.
I mean, I get the sense that he was a thinky kid, but I do think it's very obvious he's singing about things, in a way that Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes were never able to. Roger is engaging with the real world.
Actually, you nailed it there, Ian. I think it's the approachability of some of the songs. Whereas during this journey of this podcast, I have learned there are multiple Yes songs about the Vietnam War that I have no idea. So I guess, not to be so simplistic, but it's more just on the nose. Like, I know what he's talking about.
So referring back to the two sides of the album and sort of how I feel.
Yeah, life, death, and everything in between. Yep.
Right. And then this side is what it's like to live, because you've got your money, you got the things,
the stresses of modern life
in the world that populate the world. That's what this side sort of represents to me. And so this is what it's like to live side.
So that will be us and us. So we will see you next time for part 3 of Dark Side of the Moon.
So good, it needs a part 3.
It needed a part 3. So we'll see you next time.
Adios.
Adios. I have been your host, Ian Prize, and this has been a sort of young person's guide to prog rock.